Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, 4.
Show line 1,
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start, line 2.
511.
Mach 3, give me start, line 1, and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, show 7 and on my numbers.
Do something. I hate that.
Super off line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops Line 2 is code 3 for engine vibe.
Okay, so today I'm joined by Andrew Norton, and he's the very first guest in a kind of a new series I want to do. I want to call it a career debrief, where I get somebody that has recently separated from the military and kind of ask them about their career, but also ask them what they liked about the military and what they didn't like, and ultimately what was their deciding factor for separating. So first of all, Andrew, thanks for joining.
No problem. My pleasure.
And Andrew and I worked together certainly at Holloman. Man, I bet the listeners that don't know me are like, all this fucking dude does is talk about Luke and Holloman. Turns out I didn't go a lot of places, so kind of a boring career. But we were at Holloman. Do we know each other before Holloman?
I don't think so. I was at Shaw, Spangdahlem, Shaw again, Kunsan, then Holloman. So
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure.
All right. So yeah, we met each other at Holloman. Probably our real interaction was when I was an engine run certifier and you were teaching engine run, be my guest, right?
Oh yeah.
Why are you cheesing already?
All my students. Who's our certifier? I got to where I would just tell them, don't worry about it, because it would stress them out.
I know. You know what? I feel bad. I think well, I'll tell you what. We're going to start talking about your career, and then when we get to the instructor spot, maybe we might detour into that whole thing. So I guess let's start with, how long were you in? Obviously, you're in the Air Force. You were in aircraft maintenance. I think you were a crew chief, correct?
I was.
Were you F-16s the whole time? I mean, the bases you rattled off were all F-16.
Whole time. Yeah. 13 years, 5 months, 11 days, all F-16s. Very thankful for that too.
Yeah. So you joined. So when did you join?
2007.
And when did you separate?
February. My first day as a civilian was February 15th, 2021. So just at a year, little over a year.
Yeah, it's wild, huh?
Already grew a beard, chopped it off, grew it again, chopped it off again.
Yeah, I grew a beard and then I chopped it off and I realized the bottom half of my face looks fucking stupid. And I was like, uh-oh. So I grew it back and I'm never shaving my beard again. Like I think somebody said beard is to men like makeup is to women. And I don't think I could possibly agree with a statement more than that. So
this is about as low as I'll go, but I'm not going to be clean shaven again, but I had a real long bushy beard, and it was.
Oh, you did like the Duck Dynasty beard.
Oh yeah, I never had. I'd never gotten to. So
okay. That's not makeup. That's like Tammy Faye Baker makeup. When you do
that's hard work having a beard like that. It's certainly hard work. So I'm good somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's fair. Okay, so kind of run me through, like, you don't have to necessarily do like a full chronologically, but tell me some about, like, I mean, I assume you had this typical jobs: assistant, dedicated crew chief. What else did you do?
Really, for me, the majority of my time was spent as a technician, and kind of in the throes of my career, it was something that I found myself kind of frustrated about. I didn't get a lot of chance off the flight line. The only thing I ever did off the flight line was instructing, which turned out to be a really good thing. And whenever we talk about the teaching part later, I'll tell you why I thought that was. But started out a assistant dedicated crew chief at Shaw in 2007, which was a rough place to be stationed, period. Definitely a rough place to be a new airman.
Yeah.
The whole time I was there, you're the low man on the totem pole. Holloman at the time, Clovis shut down, sent all their seasoned crew chiefs over to us. So we get a new batch of people, and I'm still the low man on the totem pole. PCS to Spangdahlem as an airman, still senior airman. And there's kind of where I started to really not enjoy my job, but kind of have a more of appreciation for it.
Where you don't feel like uneasy that you don't fucking know anything, and you're used to the culture, used to the hours, and the work is coming more like naturally, right?
Shaw beat me up so much to the point of where, it was nothing to crew 2 jets a night. That was pretty much the standard for young airmen at the time. You'd have a jet come back at 6:30, have a jet come back at 7:30, and your pre-flight was expected to be done. Your jet term put to bed by then. As soon as you can close your paper TO, aging myself a little bit, but as soon as you close that TO up and run next door, you're catching the next jet. And that was kind of life for 3 years. By the time I got to Spangdahlem, though, it was definitely a benefit because I get there. It's the kind of culture where only NCOs had red X's. Well, me and another individual, Nate Hall, who's still in the Air Force, who was actually at Holloman also, were one of the only 2 airmen to get X's there in the beginning. Hard work was met with more responsibility, which at the time I liked. And then finally that kicked me in the ass enough to where I needed to make another stripe, and finally did, which would be the last one I ever made. But after there, leaving Spain, coming back to Shaw again, went to phase.
So at this point you were a staff?
Whenever I showed up to Shaw, it was a really weird situation. I made staff in 2013, walked around for about 6 months as a senior airman, not knowing that they had backdated me to October. I was deployed whenever I made it, and I came back and made it on a supplemental after everyone returned. I get to Shaw, call finance, because my paycheck looks weird. Not even paying attention. I looked at my USAA bank account. And then, they told me that they had written a waiver for me at Spangdahlem and promoted me. No one said a word to me. No one told me they wrote a waiver. I just show up looking like a jerk,
That's like legit E4 Mafia. If I could get paid as a staff and walk around with senior airman responsibilities, that's a good deal.
An old supervisor of mine, Sergeant Munoz, Emiliano Munoz, actually wrote me the package that justified to the commander why I should be promoted without going through ALS. And me and several other people, it wasn't just me. And I showed up to Shaw, no ALS. Been in for 6 years. We never got the chance to go to ALS. We deployed all the time at Spangdahlem.
Do you consider ALS to be an important milestone in your supervisory skills toolkit? Like, do you find that you were an ill-prepared supervisor without ALS?
No, because of being such a late bloomer. I mean, I had already, I'd already been running maintenance crews and running ADG removal crews and, reconfig crews as an airman, with NCOs working not for me, but we had all these people that came from F-15s and F-22s coming over, and they're looking to me and people like me that had been on Core 16s for their whole career.
You were the TO.
That was in the throes of that, where they unshredded everybody. They took our career field, because I came in, I was a 2A 3X3B, I believe it was. Yep. And they said, okay, there's no AFSCs anymore. And everyone just...
Yeah, that was one of the first fuck ups. And then we just kept stumbling. But so you said you went to phase, like you had a slot in phase?
Well, my orders had said EMS for my entire career. And I finally went to phase, did that for about 6 months. My wife got pregnant, went to support, begged to go to support. That was a good change of pace. Ended up doing that for a few months and then get orders to Korea as soon as I re-enlist. Then went to Kunsan. Phase there also went straight. That was nice, because I had heard, if you're somewhere in Kunsan, you want to be in phase. Yeah. And that could not have been further from the truth.
Really?
At least in my experience. Yeah, that's where they take all the security forces augmentees from. They take all your airmen, but you don't slow down phasing aircraft. So then instead of you have myself and another 7 level, because your shifts are combined, deep handling a whole aircraft. And boy, whenever you don't give a shit about deep handling an aircraft, that takes a long time.
So, I mean, I don't know. You don't have the answer. How come we don't have fucking maintainer augmentees?
I have no idea, but everyone got pilfered from phase. That was what it was. When
I was in Korea, I worked phase as well. I was phase at Osan, and we had these 2 reservists or guard. I don't know. I kind of don't pay attention, but we had these 2 guys that were not active duty that showed up, and they're like 2 weeks a year of commitment was at Osan. And they had like, I don't know how, they were living out in the tents out by the golf course. Yeah. I'm like, this is weird, man. But also like, this is way better 2 weeks. And one dude was a senior airman. One dude was like an A1C. The senior airman had just got out of tech school, and the A1C had not even been to tech school yet. Like he went to basic and he came back, he was waiting for a slot. And we just had him pull panels. Like pull panels, put the screw in the bag, attach the screw bag to the panel. And oh, by the way, you better turn that motherfucker, the tag should be hanging out of the screw bag. If you're a listener to this podcast and you let the screw bag tag sit inside the bag, stop listening. You're not a maintainer. You're not welcome here. But I digress. But it's like, there were so many times we'd have maintainers pulled to be security forces. I don't understand why we couldn't pull over career fields to come out to the line and fire guard, come out to the line. And like, you just need to have a pulse to fire guard lock servicing. You're just standing there, and it just baffles me that security forces in particular would always get augmentees. But I digress. So you were in or you went to Kunsan. Everybody was getting pulled, and you still had the same ops tempo for phase and jets, I assume.
Yeah, floor chief for a few months. Got put in the dock chief role about 5 months in, and then did that for the rest of the time I was there, which was a steep learning curve because I'd always been hands-on and enjoyed being hands-on. And a lot of the guys that worked for me, I mean, I frequently kept getting these looks, because you're as a 7 level, you want to come into a situation and just, what can't you get? You can't get this line. They have a wrench, you have a flashlight, and the next thing you know, they're holding the flashlight and you're holding the wrench. So I had to really get used to being hands off and letting them fail and learn from their own mistakes. And that
I bet dock chief, I bet you learned forms and cams.
I was pretty good with forms and cams to begin with, because we did so much maintenance and so many reconfigs and so many labor intensive things at Spingdalum that pulling 3 or 4 sets of forms tonight wasn't an odd occurrence. And I had X's there, and I had X's as an airman, so I was super nervous, making sure everything was referenced right. And the TO changed, twice while I was there. 0020-1 changed a couple times while I was there. So, staying on top of that. But definitely in the progress of the phase, I felt like that I stayed a technician the entire time that I was in, which I think was a good thing. Besides making more money and moving up, that's what I joined the Air Force to do, was work on airplanes. So being in that role for that long for me was enjoyable, but that really did help when it came to phase, thinking about it from a mechanical perspective. What do we need to do first? What do we need to get out of the way? They were doing silly stuff when I got there, like not pulling the stabs until day 9 of 11-day phase, and they find all this damage in the box, and they're
every time.
Yeah, that meme of the
you're talking about the Pikachu meme.
Yeah, it wasn't just me. There were several other really knowledgeable crew chiefs while I was there that were dock chiefing and 7 leveling, and it was a really good time. I still maintain when younger airmen would ask me what was your favorite base, it was a hard toss up between 4 years in Germany and a year in Kunsan. I'd argue they were equal.
Interesting.
It was
So after Kunsan, where'd you go?
After Kunsan, I went to Holloman. I was supposed to go to Alaska. I had orders that I had to follow one to Eielson, which, I'm an outdoorsman, hunter. I love to be outside, hiking, fishing, whatever I can do to be outside. And my orders there got canceled about 3 months out. Me and about 200 people
That's a lot
got
of
their
people.
orders canceled. Yeah, mostly,
Is that because
crew chiefs
Eielson got contractors to cover the maintenance or some shit?
Yeah. So AECOM, who I later ended up working for, got the contract. Promptly lost the contract.
That's because they underbid.
Yeah, they're pretty good at getting contracts and losing them.
Yeah, because they underbid, and then they're like, "Uh-oh, this is expensive."
Yeah, it turns out working on these, 35, 40-year-old airplanes that have been treated like an enterprise rental car, but worse, are pretty hard to work on.
Yeah,
it was sad. We ended up going to Holloman. Holloman was an unexpected surprise. I actually really enjoyed New Mexico. We miss it. My wife and I had a really hard time leaving.
I still talk about Mad Jack's barbecue, by the way.
Oh yeah, man. I love the hunting there. It was completely. I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up with green and mountains and streams everywhere. You don't see sand unless you go to the beach. Yeah. And you don't see cactuses unless you buy them in a store. And I enjoyed it. I absolutely loved it. But yeah, Mad Jack's.
Just having the Sacramento mountains there, where it was like, it was shitty in Alamogordo. It's just the way it is. It's a town that's literally just exists for a base.
Oh yeah.
But like, you would almost like, if you headed shoot my directions north a little bit, it almost looked like the prairies of Kansas type deal, like the tall grass and stuff like that. The Sacramento mountains, you go up there and it was like Flagstaff. It was like lush pine forest, and all the rain was kind of soaked up there. Snow, you get that. Like it wasn't as bad. It certainly wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
No, it was like I said, it was an unexpected surprise for both of us. We were really bummed out. I was in a pretty bad mood for a couple months leading up to PCSing there, and everyone that had been at Holloman that was in Kunsan, you might know some of them, Glenn, Amani Glenn, Gonzalez, some of those guys that were in phase with me were telling me how it wasn't going to be that bad. And of course, I'm thinking like I could have been in Alaska. Yeah, it ended up being great, and especially for hunting. The hunting there is fantastic.
So did you show up there and then work the line?
I worked the flight line. I showed up with the 314th.
And what year was this, just so I can frame it?
This was in 2017. I was in Kunsan 16, 17.
Okay.
I showed up to the 314th in 2016, worked the flight line for a couple months, got selected to interviewed for QA, got the job. Villanueva and I, he had a report. He was going to report in June and I was going to report in August, and they wanted to go ahead and get him in there so they could try. I think they wanted to try to code people because Holloman, as you know,
Yep.
is the only one, it seems like, who fuels Korea. It really feels that way.
Yeah, I had a previous guest. I think it was David Lemery. He was commander at, I think, Kunsan when I was at Holloman, and he said he was just getting this flood of people from Holloman into Korea. So
I mean, everyone that I was stationed with at Holloman on my shift, everyone that I was stationed with in Kunsan on my shift, I think was from Holloman, save one person. I got selected to go to QA. I was going to report in August. The same day, remember Sergeant Harrison, Senior Harrison, I believe, asked me if I wanted to come to production. It was a hard choice for me to make. I ultimately chose production, and that's what I did. I expedited for a few months, and then rumors started to come around. There was a couple of staff sergeants in production. Well, there were tech sergeants inbound, and we kind of got pulled in the office and told they knew, it didn't matter if we were capable to do the job. And I mean, I felt like it was a learning curve, but I felt like I was doing pretty well. It didn't matter that we had been doing it and we could continue to do it. We were going to get dedicated crew chief, EPRs, and expedite. And that really didn't sit well with me because I chose to stay there. I could have gone to QA, worked a nice cushy schedule, had my lunch, spent more time with my family. I turned all that down, stayed in production, which was, anything short of a 12-hour day was rare. It was normally about 11, and I lived in high rolls. So, I was gone 14 hours a day, and I chose that. And then the word was, well, you're just loaned to production. The flight chief at the time said, well, you're just loaned to production. You're going to get a dedicated crew chief EPR. And I said, the hell with that. And I started putting the feelers out and seeing if there were any jobs off of the flight line, and ultimately went interviewed for the job at MTS and got it.
And what did you teach there?
All the crew chief classes.
So forms doc, engine run, mission orientation, block training.
SABC back then, teaching all those courses, and then all the crew chief specific stuff. Started, I was one of the only crew chief types that had been blade blend qualified. And I started teaching blade blend, went TUI and got recertified on GE blade blend, Pratt & Whitney blade blend.
Did you teach me? Because I had to go back through engine run. Were you my engine run instructor when I went back through?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't remember who that was.
I only taught there for right at a year. And here's the caveat to that. The only reason, besides the fact that I was not happy about, I'm working these long days, doing my best to be a decent expediter, trying to correct all the wrongs that were what I perceived as wrongs when I was an airman on the flight line, and then an NCO on the flight line, and the gross incompetence that I had to deal with as an airman and as an NCO, trying to, make that right. And then they say, well, you're not getting this expediter EPR,
right?
This production EPR rather. And, the word was, if you went to MTS, you were on a controlled tour. See, I was really worried that they were going to send us back to Korea.
Yeah, they would have to code you for that to be the case. And if they didn't code you, you're definitely not on a controlled tour.
They were going to. I believe it was a code 38 or 9. It was a stabilization tour was what they were trying to do, because MTS and QA just kept getting just ransacked for people. Well, the flight line also, but you have a guy that's QA that's running your weight and balance program, and you send him through all that training or whatever it may be, and then he gets orders.
So I just want to back up a little bit to that EPR duty title. So what Andrew's saying, for any listeners that aren't familiar with like the nuances of performance reports and promotion and work, what essentially was happening is Andrew was performing a job that had more responsibility than what he was being paid for or what his rank would normally have. And, I don't know, I can't remember, but it sounds like he was doing quite well. But what was happening was he was told that his annual performance review would show him doing a different job with less responsibility. And what that was going to do is it was going to negatively impact his future promotion, because a lot of the promotion consideration for these in the military and aircraft maintenance has a lot to do with when you're in a position that's higher than what's normal for your rank, usually you'll get more promotion consideration. So like you can't get raises and bonuses in the military. So a lot of your like motivation to work harder is that it's going to eventually come out as a promotion. So when he was told you're going to get a lower performance report, a duty title, while doing much more work, it's fairly common, but it's also dishonest. Like there's really not any other way to talk about it. You're doing a job and they're going to write another job on your performance report, and it's not going to accurately reflect what you did. Right.
And from my perspective, you have to look at that through the lens of someone that had no interest in playing the game. I mean, once I became a staff sergeant and then they said staff sergeants can retire. I mean, I made enough money. Making tech wasn't a significant raise until I hit 16 years. So I wasn't overly worried.
Yeah.
I mean, I was surrounded. I went through this crazy change in my career of being at these bases that was mission focused and oriented. And that's what really mattered to being at these bases where I'm having brand new airmen ask me, what's the quickest way to make BTZ? I'm like, are y'all serious?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that needs to be the last thing from your mind, that you don't need to be worried about checking these boxes, getting these titles in a certain order, volunteering here because.
Well, was it just the airmen or was it everybody?
I was everyone. I lived through, the combination of sequestration and doing more with less, plus this whole kind of careerism turn in the Air Force. I mean, really jaded me and a lot of other people too. You ask a lot of people in my age demographic in the Air Force, that 14-year range that are even still serving would now be in the 15 to 16-year range. And they lived through it and saw it too. And there's either the people that played the game or the people that didn't.
Yeah.
And the people that did, more power to them, but that's just not something that I was willing to do.
Yeah.
And not something it's like you're wearing a skin that's not yours. And you get home at the end of the day and you're just like, ugh, because it's easy to do. It's easy to do.
No, that's legit. As I've talked in a few other episodes, especially with episodes with Mike Sissel, like there's playing the game where you're consciously doing the things that don't matter in order to get promoted. But there's also another game in maintenance, which is riding your people hard, not taking risks, not speaking up, not like pushing back. Like that's another game. Like that careerism is it's a layered sort of effect where there's the outward manifestation of, the drinking the blue Kool-Aid, Blue Falcon stuff, but there's also the don't say no to anyone over you, because that's also going to hurt your career. And very often the technical expertise is in the lower ranks and the managerial expertise in the higher ranks. And the higher ranks are the ones that make a lot of technical calls, and they need the technicians below with more experience to be like, no, that's wrong. That's stupid. Don't do that. Here's all the reasons why it's wrong and it's not going to work out for you. But everyone's afraid to speak up because, careerism. And
when you do, you're labeled as combative.
Yeah.
And once that word gets thrown around once, I mean, that's you. That's you're combative all of a sudden.
But in fairness, like sometimes people are combative. Like I was combative.
I was, after I was tired of not getting listened to. And then it's like the manifestation of what every other technician and I said would happen. Lo and behold, it would on some scale. And here we are.
So you're an instructor and you're at Holloman and I'm at Holloman and I'm the interim certifier, and students are suffering like ill effects from the specter of me.
Mortified.
Okay.
I had been engine run certified as an airman, so I was by no means in the mindset of I know everything about engine run, but I also wasn't the one getting grilled. I taught it. Something that I learned in my career is you don't know something until you start teaching it. Then you self-analyze and start walking back like, damn, that sounded stupid. Or why did I say, those second guess yourself. And instructing really helped me. I mean, there's things that I learned instructing that helped me or helping me now in my current job, just getting used to talking in front of 5 or 10 experts who probably know more than you, or talking to 50 or 60 or 70 new airmen in an auditorium. I mean, public speaking now to me is a breeze, and it's only because of that teaching gig. But yeah, I took the MTS job to stay at Holloman. We were worried that we were going to get sent back to Korea because the functional at the time, it was, well, you haven't been on a short tour in 365 days. Like, well, no shit. Most people haven't. We were worried we were going to get sent back to Korea if I didn't get something that would get me coded to stay at Holloman, because until then, the longest I'd ever been at one base was Spangdahlem. I pretty much PCS'd every 2 years, 2 or 3, like clockwork. I PCS'd 6 times in 13 years, which isn't record breaking, but it's also, you never get to stay anywhere, set down any roots. You're going to turn around and leave again.
Yeah. And you made a good point about the instructor. Like, I was not a good public speaker before I became instructor, and that was part of my motivation, is I wanted to get better at it, which it worked. Like, it absolutely worked. But also there was a really important part of it. Like, when I took over instruction, especially MTS, because the MTS side of the house, when I did it in 08 to 2010, like it's not like to say the academic rigor is lower, but those courses, and I assume probably for you, but that's how it was for me, those aren't like certified for CCF credits. They're not handled by Shepherd per se. It's, you build your own curriculum here and you do the best you can. So when I took over as instructor, I got handed, like, the big thing was get the binder from the person you're taking over from. The class is already built, ready to go. The slideshow like lines up, and your part 1 is in order, and your part 2, and there's a few little lesson plan notes on the side, and you can just stick to it and you're good to go. And I was like, oh, this is an easy gig. I can follow this and read. And that was one of the worst things I could do, because especially for forms doc, that 0020-1 changed so much so often, and I wasn't with the times. But it's also like a very detailed course to teach, and there's a lot, and it's part of everybody's everyday task all the time, that people would ask questions, and I would either answer from what I thought it should be, or I'd answer from the lesson plan, which may have been outdated, and I would get him the fuck up. Every once in a while there'd be like and I felt terrible, because I was probably teaching airmen the wrong shit for at least the first 6 or 7 months of teaching, because I was just sticking to the lesson plan and calling it a day. But that was a very humbling experience, that I realized that I had a duty to not just regurgitate what had always been, to really know exactly what the truth is, and to be able to articulate it and explain it so they could understand. And it wasn't about ego. I had to leave my ego at the door, because if somebody came in and they had the correct information, I had the wrong information, I needed to own up to that real fast, because I need everyone in the room. It doesn't matter if I look smart or good. I need everybody in the room to walk out with a clear understanding of what actually is, not what I said, not what the other, let's open the TO, let's see exactly what it says, let's read it and digest it, let's apply it to a few scenarios. And that made me way better at coming prepared into things, being able to speak. And you're right, I think it has paid out in spades. Like, I think that's probably one of the biggest things I gleaned from the Air Force, was my time as an instructor, of being able to digest information, speak on information, and recognize that what I say has to be as close to true as possible. And if I'm wrong, I need to admit it quickly. All right, so I guess I got to ask, like, you were there for some of my engine runs as certifier. I know I had, so my problem is also I had a really bad reputation of being an absolute fucking lunatic tyrant. Fair? I'm not saying you think I was. I'm saying I had a reputation.
The reputation, as I heard it, was thorough, and the questions wouldn't stop. But if the student answered 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 questions simultaneously, and you could tell they knew what they were doing, regardless of here's the problem. It wasn't the people that had just got engine runs that were worried. It was the people that had it for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
that
probably
was the problem. Once there was any sort of chink in the armor, they would answer a question and stumble and give you a wrong parameter or something that I had a hard time, because I was originally qualified on GEs. Coming to Pratt and Whitney's was a struggle for me. That was the problem, because once they kind of stumbled a little bit, then there were more questions.
I smelled blood.
And more questions. But it's important, because engine run was kind of trivialized. People hop in there, start it up, and run it. I mean, there is as a lot of people found out the hard way at Holloman, there's such a lack of attention to engine run. They think they just get in and stare at some gauges. I mean, that's great and all until you're doing a EPU mono, you know, and things start to go wrong. And then there's 4 or 5 people on the ground that are counting on you to make the best decision.
Yeah, so it's like the complacency with engine run is through the roof, because you do so many engine runs where it's nothing happens all the time. Hundreds of engine runs. And it's really interesting. I really enjoyed engine run. And I also loved when, especially when I went through engine run training, because I had to get recertified. But then every once in a while I get in the simulator, because I had to also recert as well and stay proficient. I'd be like, let's go. Like, and I'd want to do like the real simulator. I want you to give me some real emergencies. I want to be able to spot like B system pressure low. I wanted to like, it felt like exercise. It felt like, let me like flex those mental muscles to stay like sharp and quick. And I always enjoyed it. I wanted to be tripped up. That means I had reached my capacity for what I could do. But you're right. Like if somebody was like, boom, 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 they can answer all the questions. It was usually a really chill inter-run certification where I would just run through my standard questions. But if somebody, and I think I even did I think I had a process where like, if you missed, I think, yeah, for the like inter-run, typically you have one inter-run with no emergencies on the simulator and there's general knowledge.
Yeah.
I would do, for every general knowledge question you would get wrong, I would give you an emergency, but everyone's going to get 3 emergencies. So if like you got 12 general knowledge questions wrong, I'm going to hit you with 15 emergency procedures. And if you miss any of those, you're done. So it was very much if you come prepared with your general knowledge, you're going to have 3 EPs and you're going to be out of the seat and you're going to have a good day. So anyway, I don't want to make this a podcast about how I am an inter-run god in my own universe. So you separated in 2021. Did you do like 3 years as an instructor? Did you separate out of Holloman?
I separated out of Holloman, but I only did about a year as an instructor on the MTS side. Once it came to be they weren't going to code anybody, then I really started to sweat because I'd been at Holloman right at a year, and all the people that I'd got there with were getting orders to Korea. At this time frame, we were about to have our second child. No, about to have our third kid. And the anxiety was real about PCSing. I was really worried. I was the first one in my family that had done any kind of prolonged military service. So they have that parental guilt of, dragging their kids all around every 2 years, moving, how hard that is on children, blah, 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 all that. And that was something I was worried about. That's when I went down the hallway and talked to Sergeant DeLucia, and I said, hey, I know there are some ads out in AMS, I believe, right? AMS for tech sergeant, staff sergeant, instructor for crew chief, and I'm going to apply for one. What should I do? He put in a word to the functional, got me hired, and then that's where I ended up separating out of was a FTD. But I did about 2 years there, right at 2 years, because I believe I went there in mid 2018. And separated in 2021, but those last few months of going through that med board I was pretty absent. I mean, I was always at medical appointments. They took me off the schedule for teaching. I mean, didn't really expect much of me. COVID was going on, and I didn't really teach much in those last 6 months. So I did about a year and a half in FTD, and it was really enjoyable. It was a good skill set to get.
It's your med board. Do you want to talk about it?
Oh yeah, I don't mind talking about it.
I guess let me ask the question: were you involuntarily separated through the med board process, or did you choose to separate and the med board was just happening to be running concurrent with that?
No, I was involuntarily separated. The process was really weird. It was crazy how it all happened. So I got selected. You get selected to go to FTD. You can teach there for a little bit in shadow, and then you got to go to BIC. I go to BIC,
basic instructor course. Yeah,
right. I go to basic instructor course. I catch a nasty case of pneumonia. Can't get well. Giving my briefings, have an inhaler. You have to do your speeches. And I did some gems of speeches. I did one about Goose from Top Gun, but I briefed it like he was real. Like he was a real person. Went through his accolades, his military career. So I was really having fun at BIC.
I did a presentation on boogers.
I was comfortable teaching in front of people and talking in front of people, and I'm naturally conversational. I love talking to people about anything that I'm interested in. If I had the time, I would. I enjoy it. I really enjoy. It sounds so weird.
Just communication.
To say the art of communication, but I love
exchanging of ideas.
Yeah, okay. I really enjoy that. Okay. I really enjoy it, and especially things I'm passionate about: hunting, boxing, fighting, outdoors. I mean, you can name any kind of hobby that I have that I have an opinion on. I like talking to people that have the same or differing opinions. I think it's fun. It's something that you'll find some people are good at and some people are really bad at.
That's fair.
And
so you got pneumonia, or you had pneumonia, or having the inhalers. You're at the basic instructor course, which I assume is like down in Gunter, Alabama, or something, right?
It is in Shepherd.
Oh,
which it was strange experience. That's the first time I'd been to Shepherd since 2007.
Yeah, the armpit of Texas.
Yeah, the dorms I was in were tore down. It's kind of sad, kind of a reminiscent experience. So I'm there. I catch a bad case of pneumonia, and I'm having fun at the course. So this is kind of a bummer. We're having this bunch of crew chiefs there, a bunch of electricians. It just turned into a crew chief TDY party. It was kind of a bad thing and a good thing at the same time. I mean, it was something kind of like you miss out on that fraternity of being a maintainer. Got a bad case of pneumonia, go to the doctor. They do a chest x-ray and they take me into another room. They said, you got to come over here and see the physician. Attending physician came in, I believe he was a captain. I have a diaphragm that doesn't work correctly. You know, the way your lungs work is your diaphragm stretches them down.
That explains the fluid in the lungs.
Paralyzed diaphragm, which was not that way on my entry exam.
Yeah. You shouldn't be able to PT test very well.
I mean, the last 3 years of my career, I didn't take one anyways because I had knee surgery and then all these other issues.
So I guess it must have been some sort of partial paralysis, which means like nerve damage or something?
They traced it back to nerve damage. I got a C4, C5, or C3, C4 vertebrae.
See, I could totally be a doctor. See, I've already fucking diagnosed you already. I'm going to go to medical school next. Yeah.
You're like House.
So you had some issues in your back, and it was basically creating some sort of like atrophy or nervous system atrophy for your diaphragm, which was basically you weren't allowed to expel all the air. You weren't allowed to draw in. So then the fluid started building up in your lungs, which explained the pneumonia, huh?
Those burn pits, man. I'll tell you
okay. So like joking, yes, because you had respiratory issues, but there's a strong possibility that if you were around burn pits, you were inhaling carcinogens that probably affected your nervous system. Like I'm sure you've seen the reports that Australia came out with and the VA later like recreated, where exposure to jet fuel and high noise creates a sort of auditory dyslexia where you jarble words when you hear it and it mumbles and you can't hear it. It's like if you're in your burn pits, joking, I get it, but it very well could have had like an effect on your nervous system, inflammation or anything else. But I digress.
We burned everything. I went to Iraq and Afghanistan and we burned everything in Iraq. In Afghanistan, we were pretty far away, but Iraq, we burned everything: batteries, car batteries, tires. They burned everything. They didn't take any trash out of there with them. They burned it all. We had an airplane crash while I was there. They drugged that thing in the middle of the runway and burned it too.
So you got pneumonia and a partial paralysis of the diaphragm.
That's what started the whole thing. That's an instant disqualifying condition. That's where the whole process started. So about 33 trips to El Paso later, they'd formed enough of their medical opinion that I was going to get a formal med board and separate. Yeah. I elected not to go to the formal board, and I took it happily. This had been really hard on my family. Do all those trips back and forth. They don't pay you to go there, so you're driving your own personal vehicle, 91 miles.
Oh yeah, because El Paso was like within the 100-mile before you would get paid or whatever.
And man, they loved saying that, and I've never wanted
to punch someone in the face so much.
The way the smugness of which I'm talking to the case manager, and I'm telling her like, this is pretty far, and she's like, no, it's 100 miles. It's 91. Look, it's 91 from base, and I live on base. But okay, so I make all these trips to El Paso, which is terrible because I was in the middle of, enjoying all the people I worked with. I worked with some awesome instructors that I really enjoyed being there. Not teaching my own classes, people having to pick up my slack, which, makes you feel like shit. And then eventually not teaching at all. That, along with other things like we were talking about, seeing the big stark contrast in the careerism change, watching people really care about being good technicians and caring about.
So this med board turned into like a scary thing, turned into like, I'm going to get out of this.
Yeah, that I knew I could. I missed tech by 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points. And I might have studied a couple months, but I really just did not care. And I couldn't put myself in the mind frame of caring. I'd be really adamant. I'm going to bring my laptop to work, get there early, study. And I would do that. And then I'm just like, I don't give a shit about this. I'll make it when it's time. This doesn't have any benefit for me as a technician. And that's the thing I enjoyed most, was being on the flight line. The highest I would have ever wanted to go was maybe being a super. But really, that probably would have been really miserable. Unenjoyable.
It would have been
I would have. Okay. Being an expediter and being out there was where I wanted, eventually to end up.
So, was there no treatment options?
Oh no, I could have fought to stay in.
No, was there a way to correct?
No, you can just keep taking your PT test, and I took a mock one and could barely scrape by and pass. But it was just a lifestyle choice that I was ready to make.
So did this condition, so like I hear that it, like obviously the PT test can be much harder because you're drawing in less air, but how did this affect you as an instructor or as an expediter, a flight chief,
None.
a pro super?
Not one. Well, the first thing that I left out that it was kind of inconsequential in the end, but they let me walk around for about 5 months thinking I had cancer, that I had a mass in my chest. So that was a hard time, but turns out it was what some people can have. It's called a residual thymus, where it just doesn't go away whenever you become an adult, and you just have soft tissue there. So let me walk around thinking I had a tumor for about 6 months, and I had to do fine needle biopsies and blood tests, and got treated like a cancer patient for a little bit. That was
so you couldn't PT test, but you were able to do all the other things for your job.
No, yeah, I mean, I could do my job fine.
Were you persistently getting pneumonia, or was it just at one time?
No, I got it. I've actually had it every year since, and a little of the blame is on me. I have an aspirator that I'm supposed to use and do these breathing exercises, but I feel like 90% okay, so I don't do them just out of laziness. This year I got the flu and kind of felt like I got a little pneumonia right after it. I think I had like the flu or a cold and then COVID, and then this kind of raspy chest for a little while, and then that ultimately went away and everything was fine. But I mean, it really didn't impact me at all, and I could have very well fought to stay in. I mean, I know people who've stayed in with crazier conditions than that, but like I said, it kind of became a lifestyle choice whenever I looked at the options, and I'm going to get healthcare for life, which is one of the major concerns that people are worried about post-military. I'm going to get a paycheck for life, which is the reason people stay in and do it. And I got education benefits, which if those three things were out of the equation, you wouldn't see very many people staying in 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I mean, it seems to be.
So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of your career recap. I mean, I think I have some pretty good ideas. Like, what did you love about it? Your time in the military? I'd
say everything until I saw that kind of toxic careerism. I love being a technician. As much as you hate the long shifts, you kind of love them, especially when you're working with a crew of solid people that you enjoy working with, and you all have the same goal. The camaraderie, for sure, that's something I really struggle with nowadays, and that's what everyone told me when I was getting out. They said, you're going to miss that camaraderie, that environment, that break room banter, because you just can't act how you can in the civilian world, how you do in a flight line break room.
I think that's why I started this podcast, because it's essentially what this is. It's just,
I mean, there's things if there's any number of things you could say which would instantly get you fired now, that is common vernacular and common behavior in the Air Force.
So the camaraderie, and then working. And I think also, I talked about in the honors episode, there's a lot of fucking job satisfaction from getting a jet fixed. It's instant. Next day it's flying, or it started. Like, no one will ever know, but a crew chief probably, when you have a JFS that's been limping along for weeks or months, and you finally get a strong start that you can feel the timing of everything is hitting right where it's supposed to. And just from listening to that start, and I'm not talking, by the way, I'm not talking about those starts where you prime the fuck out of it and you got 3 starts worth of gas in there and then you light it and it's strong. I'm talking about when it sits for a day, because there was after you troubleshoot a no start, you want to hear it start cold in the morning. What does it sound like? How it's supposed to sound? And when it starts strong, that's a feeling. That's like every endorphin is just flooding you. So I'm like, I am never going to have to be back in that fucking area of that jet again, ever. I am not touching it. That's a good feeling.
The job satisfaction. I mean, I was, during my time at Spangdahl, and me and about 20 other people were on an ADG team. And that's back when we had to take all these ADGs out so they could beef up those satellite holes on 341 when they went and did the BLOS upgrades, and all those coax cables had to pass through there where they previously hadn't been. Taking that thing all the way down to the 341, putting our signatures on there, building it all back together, starting it. I mean, there's not job satisfaction like that I've ever found with anything. Pilot waiting in the seat, red balls, you name it. I mean, even something as crazy as we did at Holloman, swapping out tanks on a red ball because the pilot had time to wait. Just silly things like that. But that rush, that job satisfaction, I mean, it was, like I said, there's nothing that I've ever found like that, and I don't know if I'll ever find anything like that again. But remembering that was one of the things that I was most fond of, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people, if you're not a maintainer, and this is almost an exclusive truth. If you're not a maintainer, you don't realize there is a secret caveman internet messaging system on jets all over the fucking world. when the deepest component is removed, whatever's the deepest of the jet, before it gets installed, a maintainer will write a message to the next pathetic motherfucker that has to go in there and pull that part. It's going to be like, maybe Kilroy was here, or this AG fucked my Valentine's Day, or sucks to be you when they're pulling it off. Like, it is the funniest thing to see. But what's worse is when you see your own writing, like you put hang an ADG and then a week later it shells out and you're seeing your own caveman instant message sent to yourself. That's pretty awful. But that's a real thing.
Seen a few of those. We had a tool rep at Spingdall, and we had a tool vendor on site that came in, and they have this, believe it or not, there's a software that exists that shows things, various tight components on a F-16 or F-15. You can just plug and play whatever model that you want to put in there of any airframe, and it shows whether or not a wrench can fit on it.
Oh, wow.
Do you believe that exists? Because it does.
Wow. Doesn't feel like that exists. My
argument was one of two things, like either one, they never used it.
Yeah.
Ever used it, or two, they just made it up as a joke.
Okay, so I got a sense that careerism is something that bothered you. So also, if you're not familiar with the concept of careerism, just search the 20 Years Done archive. I did an episode where I talked about careerism and how it's essentially focusing on all the shit that doesn't matter, and we promote based off of that instead of the things that do matter. So, like, I guess my question to you is, why do you think careerism became so predominant in maintenance culture, Air Force culture? Like, I mean, there was always in the E7 and above, there was careerism because that was right, like the game to play. But you're right. Like I would see airmen, A1Cs, and that's also when like speed mentoring came out, and it's like, I don't know, and that's where the question was. Airmen started jostling. I didn't know when I was an airman. I mean, it was a long time ago. I didn't know when I was an airman that a quarterly award would in some way help me with promotion later or something. Like, I had no fucking idea.
Nor should you have really known. You probably had a jet to work on. It's not really something that you should be. You have a supervisor for that. And by the time those things matter, I don't know why. I honestly don't know where it came from. Whether it was changes in policy, changes in SecAF, I'm not exactly sure when it came to be. I remember how hard life was whenever they gouged us for manning, because I was an airman then and a new 7 level, and I mean, I really suffered crewing jets and running red balls. I mean, everyone like me, everyone, like I said, at my age demographic suffered during that time, and I believe it kind of split the Air Force into two factions. It was the group of people that had to work on airplanes and pick up the slack, and it was the group of people who were, the second they sewed on the stripe, they're trying to join 4-5 Council, Rising Airmen, and all this other shit that just didn't matter. And to me, it didn't matter. To them, it mattered.
No, it didn't matter.
My argument was, what are we paid to do? Paid to work on airplanes. It's what we're paid to do. And
well, I think the flaw was the way promotions and all those things were supposed to be set up is you take all your hard workers first, and once you figured out who your key technicians are, and it shouldn't be everybody, you move them into a pile. And then if you don't have enough, whatever the promotion's going to be, because eventually we went to quota, then you would start looking, okay, these are all our badasses. Okay, now let's look at who are our badasses that are also going above and beyond what's required. And I think in practice, we either didn't want to tell people they weren't badasses, or it could have been the symptom of, I want my guy to be promoted, because if my guy's promoted, it's a reflection of me as a leader, and that's going to help me. But we just homogenized everyone as a good worker, and then went, okay, who's done volunteer work and other stuff? Right.
It was very, very little job performance based, because everyone was getting a 5 unless you got a DUI, then you were getting a 4. Which I heard a quote about that EPR system one time that it's very untrue and somewhat true at the same time. The gentleman I used to work with said at least it was fair. At least it was fair in the sense of you volunteering doing the extra things, you're still getting a 5. It didn't really matter. That was his argument for.
Well, then also with the
I guess
quota system, now you're pitted against your teammates, right?
It made people that's one thing you mentioned, that it made people get really sneaky, kind of like a layer of insidiousness to it, where they're taking credit for other people's work, kind of playing the politics game as a 22-year-old senior airman, bad mouthing other people in front of the expediter, so-and-so's. And that kind of got weird to me. It made me feel dirty. I didn't like that.
So, but it also sounds like family stability was like a real consideration for you too.
Once I had a family, but the jaded part happened long before that.
Well, no, I mean, I guess I'm thinking about like, what were the reasons why you got out, even though the med board.
That was the majority of it. I by no means left the Air Force because, I was just sick and tired of seeing people who didn't deserve to get promoted and didn't deserve to get accolades get them. That actually was probably the lowest thing on the list. It was the overall culture, where I saw the Air Force going, kind of how the tone already was when they're kind of pushing careerism on you to an extent. Like, well, you got to do these things. You got to check these boxes. And most of us are like, for what? You're talking to a bunch of people who've been on the flight line for 6, 10, 12 years, and they're just happy to be here and instructing and getting to teach new airmen. And the beauty of that job is you can take someone who is a real crew chief and make other real crew chiefs, because there's a pretty rewarding thing when you make a bunch of new young airmen excited about being crew chiefs. That was another good layer of job satisfaction.
It's like legacy. You're putting it out in the world. I remember one time I was doing, I think, either an engine run or an engine run research as a certifier, and the dude sits in the seat, and I don't know him from Adam. And, I always try to like bullshit and talk to him. And it turns out his supervisor, or maybe his engine run instructor, I think his supervisor was a guy that was like my airman. So like I saw him as my grand airman, if that makes sense. Oh yeah. And I could almost see, because I had taken a lot of time with this airman, that the guy in the seat is actually really fucking sharp too. Like that is like part of the legacy of what I handed down when I taught this person. He passed along those great lessons and information. So I guess what else? I mean, what else were your thoughts of? I mean, we probably won't dive too much into the what was on the other side of the separation, but it seems like you had the ability to fight the med board if you really wanted to. So I'm thinking, what were the anchors that were dragging you back from fighting the med board? So you talk about careerism, just an overall culture shift. Probably, I suspect, just based on our conversations, that resource restriction and all those sorts of things in maintenance felt like we were just kind of starving and poor. The family stability as well. What else?
That was really the driving force. I mean, I wanted to put some roots down and make a more stable environment for my family. And I saw how you get, I didn't ask for this to happen. And I kind of see how you get treated. You kind of get like a broken toy, you get cast to the side whenever you can't. And luckily I wasn't on the flight line when this happened. It would have been even worse. People would have had to pick up actual slack, not just teaching students and dropping them off in a van and picking them up in a van. So at least it was a little bit mitigated in that respect. But you kind of see, you get that broken toy treatment. It's wild, right? Yeah, you're teaching, everything's fine. Along comes this medical issue.
Immediately a burden. Yep.
Your body broke, piece of shit.
And there's always this thread of whether they say it or not, they question the severity, the validity, the diagnosis, the effects on you, appointments, whether they're necessary, whether it has to be now. And then like there's a whole, and it's a very strange treatment.
I'm driving, all the way to El Paso, which I don't want to do. My personal vehicle. Sure, I get to listen to a podcast on the way down there if I'm lucky enough to have service in that dead zone.
Yeah, there's a fucking real dead zone.
But I mean, I'm driving down there. I didn't ask for this issue. I've only been a technician. I have no valuable skills besides working on airplanes. And here I am, my career's coming to an end.
And you're made to be shamed.
Well, yeah, you're a piece of shit. Your body broke. Now I'm getting treated like this by people who might have PCS'd once or twice, have never deployed, and I've been to what I think are the hardest to be at F-16 bases, and I've been at some of them twice. I've deployed 3 times, TD wide, probably another 15. I mean, God, I've been to Vegas so many times. I know my way around from the 15 red flags I've been to. And I'm getting treated like this by people who haven't walked in my shoes. And it was a hard, a lot of humility just to swallow my pride and not make my situation any worse.
And why do you think they treat you like that?
Don't know and don't care. I mean,
what do you think? Why would someone treat you like that?
Well, I mean, you see it to everybody. You see it to everybody that has that happen to them. And I've been guilty of thinking and treating people that way before. And the older I get, the more I experience life, I see that, everyone's got their own things outside of work, but I think it's that hyper mission focus to the extent of where you forego everything else that does that. And that's okay whenever we're not that instructing isn't a real job, but that's okay when we're working on airplanes and we're generating air power at a PACAF base. But
I guess the issue is, here's my thought. So I see it as, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, I think is almost the mindset. Like, if you are healthy, you are part of the solution because you are capable of taking on an equal workload, a high workload, working full hours, working full shifts. And if you're not healthy, now you're part of the problem because you are occupying a manning place. I don't have people for you. Everybody else is picking up your slack. You've now become a burden on me. And when you man a unit, when you resource a unit with the assumption that everyone's going to be healthy all the time, like, humans don't work that way.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way. Like, and that goes back to, I know I'm a fucking broken record and maybe someday I'll change my tune, but when you resource the least amount to accomplish the mission, you're one hiccup away from like cascading sort of deferments. And then, by the way, when other people pick up your slack, they're missing some family time. They're unable to get to appointments. They're unable to do these things. So you, as the person that's kind of, injured, feels that guilt and burden as well. But also those people are now losing out on the family time and all these other things, and it's stressing them out. And it's like, there are real tangible effects when you try to squeeze all the productivity out of all the human beings all the fucking time. Eventually people are going to start falling out through stuff like you had, or just if they bear the burden and they get tired, they get worn out. And I think it's a real folly. The military should be resourced above the minimum. It doesn't have to be, shoot for the moon maximum, but you can't be at this level of resources in people, time, experience, manpower, iron, parts, everything. You can't be at that level all the time. It just doesn't work.
And we weren't really strapped for instructors. So, I mean, it definitely was it was irritating to push a class and then have one day off and then push another class. But, and that happened to me several times. It happened to a lot of instructors. You're kind of upset about it because you wanted your 2 days to go to PT at one and then not come back.
But it's like, you say that you weren't that, well, it wasn't that bad off. But the reality is, when your section is manned in such a way that when you fall out and the other instructors have to pick up your slack and they start losing that gap time from one class to another and everybody's kind of slotting in and they still want to get promoted, when do they do the volunteerism? When do they do the PT? If it's, I don't know, you guys schedule instructors might have been on duty, might have not, right? When do you do the college work? When do you do all the other things? When do you just, take time off and just decompress or go to your kid's recital or something? And like, those are important things that people should have time for, because ultimately you're going to come back a better instructor, because that your marriage is like getting fed, like you're feeding the marriage the things it needs to sustain. Your kids are getting FaceTime with you. They're getting interaction. They're getting all of those sorts of things. And then you can just concentrate on work. So while you might have had enough people where it wasn't that bad, I think it's a manifestation of the military mindset of any time you take for yourself is wrong, because that's a real part of the culture. Any time you set aside time for yourself, you're seen as selfish. I think probably you guys needed more instructors more than you realize you probably did, I would say.
And I was more than comfortable with being in that role, because like I said, I felt like I had done enough and been around enough to where whenever I saw my career wrapping up and coming to an end, that I mean, if they weren't going to schedule me to push classes, I'm like, okay, that's fine with me. Because if you're so replaceable to the fact where you have whatever it is, insert any sort of situation that it's met with, well, now you're a burden, then I mean, to hell with them. That's kind of was mindset towards the end. And once I realized, I'm going to have healthcare for my family and I forever, going to have a paycheck forever, there's really no incentive to stay. I mean, there's really no incentive to stay.
So we're probably going to wrap up, but I'm going to ask you the question I ask probably every guest or most guests. If you were like SecAF for a day, and it doesn't have to be a day, like if you had the power to change one thing in the military, either about your career in particular or just systems, processes, cultures, whatever, what would you change?
One thing that I feel like has to be forefront and most important is we have to find a way, and I don't have the solution, but we have to find a way to adequately reward people for their hard work. And I don't mean, some half-ass put together reward system. There needs to be physical, tangible rewards, whether that be.
You mean like a weekend pizza party?
I mean, yeah, that's normally what it is. Hey, I know we've been making your guys' life living hell and worked you 70-hour weeks, but here's some little pizza. Caesar's fucking pizza. Like, you can't even get good pizza? We got some hot and readies? Gee, thanks. I mean, tangible rewards that can actually be quantitated, and they need to be personalized to the person. A lot of crew chiefs value time off.
Yeah.
I mean, a CTO day for your birthday, as silly as it is that your commander, like the commander I had at the detachment, that CTO day for your birthday, I mean, that's an extra day. You could take a Friday and get a 3-day weekend, and that's a lot of people enjoyed, things like that. I think personalized rewards for career proficiency and doing the actual work required, not the bullshit. I mean, being a good mechanic, looking out for your people, that needs to be rewarded at scale. And I don't feel like it is.
Well, it's interesting. Like, you talk about looking out for your people. As I've said in prior episodes, I really feel like the Air Force's, not necessarily emphasis, but their consideration of volunteerism or volunteer work and self-improvement is a way to try to determine the moral or leadership qualities of an individual, like through the tea leaves of what they volunteer for and what their self-improvement is. But that doesn't say anything about how someone takes care of their people. And when you have a feedback system and you have a performance report system where it's only what your boss can see is what channels up. I mean, how much different would people be treated if their subordinates had any amount of power over their promotion, even if it was like a drop in the bucket?
It would be a stark contrast to how it is now. I understand that there needs to be some healthy competition at some point for promotion, but it's exacerbated to where it's getting, like I said earlier, it gets sneaky. You have 4 or 5 people gunning for one stratification. No, not everybody plays by the rules.
Yeah,
things get cliquey. Things get a little weird. Things make people jaded. Things make people say the hell with it. I mean, there's a lot of that. I think mitigating that in some way is important. I mean, that our job is to generate air power down when you go down to brass tacks. That's what we're supposed to do. Fix airplanes, keep an airplane flying that was never meant to fly this long, do it the best we can, and do it right the first time. Make good judgment calls, keep pilots safe, come home safe, keep your people safe. So anything outside of that is just white noise to me personally, but I also value being a technician. I mean, if I could just be a technician and supervise airmen, even if I was offered to take more responsibility, like in the role of a section chief, I don't know if I'd ever want to do that. I don't think that was something I would enjoy doing. I think I would much rather be out there working. So I think finding a way to highlight the people that are doing their job they're paid to do well, getting rid of some of that internal competition to where it makes people just dishonest. It makes people dishonest. It brings out the worst personality traits in people, and staffing us adequately where, like you said, you're not a piece of shit if you have a life-altering health condition that literally brings your 13-year career to an end. And at the time, I was really upset about it, and I wanted to stay in.
And when you think about how you were treated, I did the episode I think it was like episode 39. I wonder if I have these episodes memorized. We'll see. Episode 39, I think it's mental health and pregnancy. Like what you experience for your medical condition, I suspect almost every woman experiences when they become pregnant, where it's you're a burden, you're not part of the solution, now you can't do this. And
I've seen it happen.
And this is like, they're just trying to build a fucking family. Like,
and I was by no means like, I wasn't ostracized. I wasn't treated badly.
But it still,
the air in the room changed. Like, oh, you're going through a med board? It's like, well, no more assets are getting diverted to you.
Correct.
No more, no consideration for any sort of award or package, even if you've earned it. No, nothing.
Which is bizarre.
None of that stuff. Yeah, it's really weird because we can give that to someone who matters, who's healthy.
Yeah.
So
really.
It's. I mean, I think highlighting all those things, putting some sort of a more valuable rating on technical proficiency, and finding a way to highlight the people who are actually doing a good job because they're doing a good job, and then the people are doing it for show. And there's a lot of people doing it for show. And it's so easy for you to see when you're their peer, but to leadership, when they see it, they're like, oh, this person's killing it. They're doing all these classes. They're doing all this stuff. And you have people that...
But I thought some people were like good technicians, good leaders, and it turns out they weren't. But
and they have a lot of people fooled.
Yeah, but people have come in and be like, hey, he's not as good as you think he is. I'm like, all right, have a seat. Fucking get me up to speed because I don't want to, I don't want to do this. But we got to wrap up. I'm wondering, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I really have this. It was fun, enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm glad we did this. You were the first one for the career debrief.
All right.
Well, Andrew Norton, thank you very much for joining the podcast, man.
No problem. Thanks for the invite.
All right. Adios.